So today, we're going to start with something that I suggested to Irina was important to talk about, is how our heritage learners see themselves, identify themselves, perceive themselves, and where do they fit as, are they Russians, are they Americans, are they something else, and how does that affect their Russian language learning? Because I would maintain that it does. What I would ask you to do while you're watching is, and you can write whatever you want to about the particular students that you see in the handout, but specifically, how do you see them as heritage learners or non? Which ones do you see as heritage learners? Which ones as non-heritage traditional learners? Okay? And anything else that, because I'm going to stop afterwards and ask you if you have other comments or questions about what's going on in the video. So we're almost there.
Just a second.
It's okay. No problem. And just to give our visitors an idea of what's going on here, unless, have you seen this video before?
No.
Okay. And then this was a class, a very interesting mix of Russian 4 and Russian 1 that happened. That was how I maintained my program at Brighton High School, because, of course, you have to have enough numbers to run a class. We had flexible modular scheduling, so we had a 6-day cycle. And this year, that this class happened, instead of giving me all 6 days, they only gave me 5 days. And at the beginning of the year, I was just in despair. What in the world was I going to do? And I finally thought, the participants have heard this, that, okay, I could meet with the Russian 1 students 3 days and give them independent work for the other 3 days. I could meet 1 day with the Russian 4s, and the 5th day, they would meet, most of the time meet together. Sometimes the Russian 4s went to the computer lab, but many times they would meet together, and the Russian 4s would pair with the Russian 1s and do activities with them. They did things like interviews, practicing saying their age and their birthday. Remember, this was 10 years ago, so we kind of did it. And in this particular class, they were doing an exercise of reading to write. We'd been studying Russian geography, which it turned out that the Russian 4 students, well, most of the Russian 4 students also needed. They'd come here, the oldest at age 10, and younger than that, they missed learning the geography of Russia, and they wanted to know about it. So it was a unit that fit both levels. And that's what's going on here. And in this particular class, they are reading a little story about a fictional character named Gleb, who appeared in a lot of my little readings that I wrote. And then they are using that and some other materials to write their own very simple story. So let's watch and try to identify heritage learners, non-heritage learners.
For the pre-writing activity, they read a short story that I had written about a mythological character named Gleb, who lives on a mythological island. He wants to go to another city because someone he knows lives there. What he can see when he gets to that other city.
Это дорогой брат Борис Владимиров.
This idea of writing stories is a way for the Russian 4 class and the Russian 1 class to work together. There was a Russian 4 student in each group working with 2 or 1 student from Russian 1, and the idea of the pre-writing was to give them a model for creating a story that was limited a bit, so that the Russian 4 students wouldn't try to go off into lots of vocabulary and complex things that the Russian 1 students wouldn't be able to manage.
Okay, живет Лев в Одессе. The name of the place. Oh, another name. Ukraine. Что Ukraine? Oh my God. И Лев очень хорошо его. Очень хочет. Хочет. Okay. Хочет, want, right? Yeah. Evolve, you read it. To see?
Yeah.
It also gives the Russian 1 students a good chance to hear someone else speaking Russian besides myself.
Кто герой в этом рассказе?
Клен.
Где он живет?
Parents gone before that.
Где second life?
I worked with Dennis, he's from Kiev, and so if I have a question about something in Russia, something having to do with the language, he could explain it, but then also go back and tell me a story about his like hometown, and tell me like how different things were used, and just history, like how the people were, the culture. It's nice having a native.
It's beneficial for me to have level 1 in there because I have to be more careful about my grammar, and I can't tell them to spell something wrong, so I have to actually think about what I'm spelling and how to spell it. So it's very good for grammar, and plus it's good for like talking to other people.
Что же можно там увидеть? Кого, вернее?
Борис, Владимир,
Жюри. Который приходится Глебу кем? Братом?
They had a grid where they were filling in answers to who is this character, what is he like, where does he live, where does he want to go, what can he see there. It was a way of organizing what they were going to do when they wrote their own story and reviewing some of the phrases they needed to use.
Я понимаю, что в городе Одесса можно увидеть красивый театр, где Борис любит слушать оперу Евгения Онегина.
Он хочет увидеть не оперу, а Шумовой море, где можно плавать.
И какой молодец, прекрасно. Где живет? На острове Минске, да. И куда он хочет поехать? Одессу. В Одессу, да. Что можем увидеть?
Черное море.
И кого?
Борис.
И кто Борис?
Его брат.
Окей. Ты все, они все понимают?
Все очень хорошо понимали.
Отлично. Спасибо огромное. Молодцы. Окей.
Okay, next part is great. We
Yeah,
will
next
watch
part is where they're going to write their own
Mm-hmm.
stories. And then one or two of them are going to present.
The meat of the lesson was to prepare some stories, some original narratives of their own about a city. And for that, I had prepared some frameworks of posters with a city on each. And the cities that I chose were chosen because they happened to match postcards that I had. Then their task was to take their city and take a character with using some dolls that a friend of mine made and write up or think about where that doll lives, what city he wants to go to or she wants to go to.
We're trying to decide which place we want the doll to go to. I like this one.
Yeah. So
Then they took the postcards and chose one or two to have that person, have the doll say she wants to visit.
And so this place is called Manina?
no, it's who to the
Cathedral.
distance suburb.
It's the Cathedral of the Nativity of the Virgin.
Yeah.
Cathedral? Church of St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
Church of St. Nicholas.
Try to read it in Russian. Рождественский собор. Okay.
We'll do собор.
Okay. So we'll do this place and we'll do this one. Let's see the middle one.
This is the convent of the Disposition of Virgin.
Russian.
This geography unit is probably about the only unit that I could fit for both of them, because it turned out that a lot of the Russian 4 students really didn't know the geography that well. I don't always see these two groups together. Most of the time what I design for the Russian 4 students is at a higher level of language and a higher level of cultural knowledge, and really digging into the literature and the history.
We have to pick a name for her.
Her name's
Irina? Okay, and where is she living?
Что ты думаешь, она хочет увидеть?
Игорь.
Игорь? Кто Игорь будет? Ее брат?
We try to get them to start really thinking in the foreign language. That's why the pre-writing activity was that story that already has the structure to it that is in Russian, and will avoid them having them fall into the trap of trying to say something like "to have a good time," which they would then try to translate word for word, and then it just doesn't come out in any way that a Russian would understand or use.
До учителя? В Америке, и она хочет поехать. Okay. Okay. So
the doll gives them a way of creating a story so that they can kind of put themselves into this character. I think that's easier for them to actually to be talking about someone else, make up a story like that, and it's fun, it's relaxing. And they were authentic also. They were from our sister city.
Где ты живешь?
Я живу в Санкт-Петербурге.
В Санкт-Петербурге. А где это место?
Это
На реке?
ты знаешь, что это?
Это... Нет, я забыла.
Это великий.
Да. Мы хотим про это говорить.
А ты знаешь, что это?
Это змея.
You know what it is? Змея?
A snake?
Why is he standing on a snake?
Я не знаю.
Ты знаешь?
Потому что не могу объяснить, потому что по-русски не могу.
Okay, по-английски.
To get the people listening.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting though is, do you know the story of St. George? George and the Dragon? Look right behind you. George. St. George on the horse. And what's he trying to kill?
Snake.
Yeah. Okay, it's the most typical in Russian icon painting is exactly that. So they transfer it. Almost looks as if they were thinking about that when they translated it. I was surprised today at some of the questions that came up. I had not realized that the postcards would get us into talking about Russian history and Russian cultural icons, even in the Peter the Great statue and the idea of the St. George and the Dragon. It hadn't occurred to me that we would get into that kind of discussion. Кстати, Дина, мы будем читать поэму Пушкина. Именно об этом памятнике. На берегу пустынных волн стоял он, дом великий, полный вдал глазет. Okay? Okay.
So now we're going to move on to the last segment that we're going to watch, and then we're going to talk about who are the heritage learners and who are not.
Presentation will be of stories, right?
Давным-давно жил небольшой русской деревне добрый
молодец, которого звали Добрина. Жил он...
When I was taking notes on the presentations, I was looking for fluency. Where was it rolling? And that was hard because certainly in that first group, the influence of the Russian 4 student was that was really still complicated advanced Russian. So she was having a bit of a challenge getting through it. And if it had been simpler Russian, I would have been a little more demanding in hoping that she would be pacing it better.
Удачи Добрина.
Okay. Вопросы? Questions about Kiev? Анюта, да?
Кто там живет?
Кто там живет, да?
В Киеве живет дядя Добрыни, которого зовут Николай.
Дядя Николай. Один вопрос здесь, Леша.
Что это за фотография в середине? Это Андреевская церковь, which is St. Andrew's Church.
И как ты хорошо знаешь Киев?
Я там жил.
Он там жил. What does that mean for you? Denise там жил.
He lived there.
Lived there, right? Okay.
It also hadn't occurred to me that some of the Russian 4 students would recognize the doll enough to make the story about the figure that doll actually is. And that was great. They were using the presentational mode when they stood in front of the room and presented the story they had written to the others. Those who were listening were using the interpretive mode because they were having to get information.
Давайте послушаем.
Ваня сильна и простой, молодой человек. Еще он религиозный. Ваня живет в Москве. Его сестра Катя работает как супермодель в Новгороде. Ваня хочет поехать на север в Новгород, чтобы увидеть свою сестру и собор Рождества Богородицы в Новгороде.
It's not the teacher's language, it's not the textbook language, it becomes the student's own creations, something that they put themselves into and it means something to them. And you can tell that they want to present these stories once they've worked on them. They consider them theirs and they're invested in them.
Wow.